So hello everyone. Good evening to friends in India. Good morning and good afternoon to friends who've joined us from all over the world. Uh, so before I start, I would like to wish everyone a warm pre-Diwali greetings. Here's wishing you all and your families prosperity, happiness, good health from all of us at CHH. Once again, we welcome you to our resilience lecture, this time with a different host. Professor Schmidt couldn't join us. I couldn't host this event because she's slightly unwell, but here's wishing her speedy recovery so that she could join us next Friday. But she's very much there, and we can see her messages. So here's me, I'm Shatavisha. I'm a research assistant. I'm also a PhD student. I work on the ecologies of value making in modern and contemporary Indian art. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Mehrangarh Museum. Established in 1972, the Mehrangarh Museum Trust was built by Maharaja Singh of Jodhpur. The museum narrates a history of the bygone era and houses a wide collection of well-preserved Mughal as well as Rajput miniature paintings. The trust is at the forefront of conservation and restoration, and a generous patron of the arts and music, and a lively center for academic study as well. And this gets reflected on the museum website. I insist, if you haven't already, please do visit the website. There is probably a category that the website doesn't list. From architecture to armor, from conservation to cafes, the museum's contribution is unmatched. The museum is also a well-deserved recipient of the UNESCO Asia Pacific Award for its contribution in the field of museology. Tonight's guest is also special. I've heard about him and I've read about his work as a young artistry student. And I must say that I'm mesmerized by his contribution to Palace House Museum, which resulted in the breathtaking Mehrangarh Museum. Karni Singh Jasol is the director of the Mehrangarh Museum Trust Jodhpur. Educated at the Mayo College, Mr. Jasol is a recipient of several prestigious fellowships, including the Charles Wallace, the Nehru Trust Award, and the Fulbright. He worked at several renowned museums across the globe, offering his expertise. It's a pleasure to have Mr. Jasol. Over to you, sir.
Good evening and very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you, Satavisha, for the introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening. Going to share this evening the living history of Mehrangarh, the historic fort of Jodhpur. And in the second part, share the journey of the fort to becoming a museum in 1970s, and also a period where we are rethinking Mehrangarh. So Mehrangarh truly is a living and a breathing monument. It's dynamic, it's ever evolving, it's contemporary. And in that sense, it's very exciting. It is not frozen in time, it evolves every day. And that is the most exciting part of my job as the curator of the museum, that we are not fixed in ideas. We are constantly rethinking about how to present the fort and its collections to the people, how we can become more accessible, how our collections are widely researched and accessible. It's real pleasure having you all. I see in the room several names who are my colleagues for a long time, and I welcome you all with warm Diwali greetings. I'm going to start with slides and share with you how the historic fort of Jodhpur, Mehrangarh, is not a monolithic structure. How it is a constantly evolving structure, and how, as art historians and as museum professionals, we can treat our monuments so that they are exciting, they are engaging, and they are participatory. And I would look forward to your questions towards the end of our presentation. So this is the historic fort of Jodhpur, Mehrangarh, almost cropping itself from the hill itself. For our overseas viewers, let me just geographically place it. It's in the modern state of Rajasthan, which is here in the western part of India, and it was the capital of a former kingdom, which was called Marwar. Mehrangarh is a unique living landscape of fort, palaces, places of worship, and it is truly the heart of Marwar. The wider constituency of the kingdom really looks up to the monument as their own, and there's a deep connect between the locals and uh, the fort. In the first part of my presentation, I would like to share with you how one should interpret a structure like this. Often it is viewed as a fort, sometimes it is viewed as a museum, sometimes it is viewed as a palace. The building has three principal functions. As you can see from the slide, that it is a fortified structure. It was built to defend. It has all the attributes of a defensive architecture. It almost crops itself from the hill, which is a rhyolite hill, and, and a unique formation of geology in Jodhpur. It has got bastions, huge ramparts with cannons lined on it. But as you step in, you encounter the beautiful palaces within. In this slide, you can see the placement of the Mehrangarh fort within the context of city. The city truly has grown around the historic fort of Jodhpur, and it really crowns the landscape of Jodhpur. In this slide, you can also see that how irregular the building is. It's an asymmetrical architecture. It is not built in one period. It is built over a long period of time. Uh, Several Maharajas, right from 1459, which was the foundation of the fort by Rao Jodha, after whom the city is named Jodhpur, which literally means Jodha's city. The fort has constantly evolved itself into the present structure. Apart from its defensive attributes, the fort had another very important function, and that is as the seat of power. Now, these are some of the elements which are often missed when interpreting a historic site within, let me say, within the context of Indian uh, heritage. That we remove part of history, we remove part of interpretation, and present the site without people. People are integral to understanding a site. So I began with fort as a structure which is defensive in its architecture. The second important function of the site was that it was the seat of power. It is from here that the king is administering his large kingdom. So several spaces in the fort have administrative function. In this slide, you see the first courtyard where my cursor is, which is the anointment seat. It is where the king is anointed as the king. In the next courtyard is where the king held his court. And these functions are integral to our understanding of the site. Here in this beautiful painting from Maharaja Singh Ji's period in the 19th century, you see the architecture that you saw in the previous slide represented in the painting where Maharaja Singh Ji is anointed as the king. It is very important to understand the role of king as an administrator. When we visit a historic site like Mehrangarh, it is more than the delicate architectural palaces or just sort of a linear history of the king and the queen. It is a very complex interest. It is a very complex history which requires to be interpreted in a way that it engages the visitors of today in a more meaningful way. King as a warrior, king as an administrator, king as a patron, king as an upholder of secular tradition. These are some of the key roles that the king played, and it is within these spaces that the king was administering himself with these several roles. Here in this painting, you see Maharaja as a patron, where he is um, receiving jewelry and is viewing them. Here he acknowledges the great contribution of poets and the context of the king's role within the historic structure like that of Mehrangarh really is important in understanding how these spaces were historically used. King as a patron, where this is one of the most beautiful rooms of the fort, Phool Mahal, or the Palace of Flowers. It's a 18th century room which was built under the patronage of Maharaja Abhay Singh, but was remodeled in the 19th century under the patronage of Maharaja Thakur Singh. So interiors of the fort, apart from their administrative function, were also the function of showcasing the power, status, and the contribution in continuing tradition of arts and music is symbolic in this beautiful room. The room has one of the most amazing ceilings, which is a metal filigreed ceiling. And just above the metal filigreed ceiling, there's a mirrored ceiling. So when you would light up candles in this room, it would reflect back from the mirrored ceiling and would illuminate this room in the most magical way. In this beautiful painting of Maharaja Abhay Singh, where he entertains himself with court musicians and painters, it gives us a visual context of how these nights were enacted. These beautiful details from this room, done under the patronage of Maharaja Thakur Singh in 19th century, showcases how delicate the wall paintings and detailing were. They're almost three-dimensional. And I have personally viewed this room when the candle lights are lit. It just glows. The room has completely different feeling when you bring in an element of light in it. So what is amazing is that when this room was conceived as a space, um, it was conceived with the idea of light, entertainment, music being integral part of this room. This room is acoustically brilliant. And when you hear a sitar or a tabla or a vocal in this room completely changes its character and it comes alive the way it was conceived by uh, the, the brilliant team of the patron and uh, the, uh, uh, the, the people who are responsible for its interiors. So apart from, so we've looked at the building in two important contexts. The building as a fortified structure, as a defensive architecture. We have just witnessed the building as the seat of power, where the king is administering his important duties as an administrator, as a warrior, as a patron. The third important element of the building is that it was the official residence of the royal family. This is a beautiful 19th century bedroom of Maharaja Thakur, and it's brilliant in its design and composition. From the floor to the ceiling, every inch of this room is brilliantly executed. The floor, which almost sort of gives you an impression that it's a rug, but it's actually a painted, line plastered floor. The ceiling is a wooden ceiling, lacquered and beautifully painted. One of the first wooden ceilings to be part of fort's architecture. Maharaja Takht Singh Ji was adopted from a state in Gujarat, Eider, where there was a strong tradition of wooden architecture. And with him came the tradition of elements of wooden architecture being adapted in the interiors of the fort. He was the last king to live in the fort. And in true sense, this is the last example of a traditional Indian painted interiors that we have in Jodhpur. His successor and his son, Jaswant Singh, would move to a colonial style building, and a new era of style, aesthetics, and sensibilities will come into force. So, in true sense, Maharaja Takht Singh Ji, who was the last resident of Mehrangarh Fort, is a classic example of how the aesthetics are in transition and how rapidly um, the, uh, the court culture and art changes. He would be the first Maharaja to be photographed. So, with him, truly, the tradition of painting comes to an end and it evolves into painted photographs, and then finally, very soon, in very rapid transition to photography as being the key documentation element in recording the court culture. A very important part of the fort and often overlooked and significant to the architecture of the fort was the zanana or the ranvas or the palaces of the queens. Physically in Mehrangarh today, ranvas occupies more physical space than the mardana. And we are aware that the Maharajas had more than one wives, and the physical space required by the Zanana was much more than the administrative spaces required by the king. And these were dynamic spaces. These were spaces for long not researched, not interpreted, but extremely cosmopolitan spaces. And often our understanding of the Zanana is women behind the veil, women behind the jalis. But the queens were major patrons of arts and traditions. They were important vehicles of secular traditions being carried from generation to generation. The queens came from different geographical areas, brought with them different linguistic traditions, different traditions of cuisine, and in that sense, it made these physical spaces very, very cosmopolitan. And the our understanding of these spaces for a very long time was very limited. But fortunately, to recent research, our understanding of these spaces and the activities of these spaces is broadening. And I'm sure in future there would be a far greater understanding of the very important role that women played in the court culture of Rajputs. They were very, let me tell you very candidly, they were very powerful. They were force behind the throne. The, the throne room of Mehrangarh physically lies in the Zanana. And that's a very, very revealing fact. The queens were great patrons of arts, of elements of crafts and tradition, which are reflected in the collection of the museum today. A very important contribution of the queens was continuity of traditions. India is a country of celebration. India is a country of customs, of um, festivals, uh, and it's only coincidence that today being an important festival of Diwali. And just last month was the festival of full moon celebration. Here in this painting, you have Maharaja Thakur celebrating the full moon night celebrations, Sharad Purnima, in the Zanana. And I personally feel that the queens played this very important pivotal role in continuity of tradition within the Rajput whether it was the tradition of weddings, of festivals, of events like this. They were important vehicles of taking this tradition forward. And it, in fact, to an extent that even it continues today. Um, so I'm going to request Shavista at this moment for us uh, to move our gear from our understanding the physicality of Mehrangarh to its new avatar as being a site open to public. This change happens in 1972, and this I thought we would give a short break in terms of the PowerPoint into a more sort of a video visual to make you understand that when the fort turned into a site as a museum, how did it interpret itself and how did it came into an avatar of itself as India's leading cultural institution. So may I request to play the video, please? Mm. Um, I'm just waiting for the slide to upload. I thought the video, the attempt of sharing the video was for us to very quickly understand how Mehrangarh as a site evolved after it seized its role as a defensive architecture, after it seized its role as the official residence of the royal family, and as a site which is open to public, as a monument, and as a museum. Please bear with me because I cannot see the next slide. Okay, here we are. Okay, that's the man of the moment. The person who's responsible of the new avatar of Mehrangarh post India's independence. Uh, his father, Maharaja Hanwant Singh, was the last Maharaja at the time of independence. He dies tragically in a plane crash. The present Maharaja, at age 4, is sent to a boarding in Eton. This is in 1952, and he returns back to India in 70s. In 70s, India is a very different country. We have shades of socialism. Royalty is a bad word. Um, Indian forts and palaces are white elephants, and no one knows what to do about them. And this is a time when the historic homes, palaces, and forts all over India, especially in Rajasthan, uh, sees a new avatar as heritage hotels and as museums. So the palaces are adapted into heritage hotels, and forts and historic palaces as museums open to public. The Fort of Jodhpur was open to public in 1974 and was interpreted as a historic spaces adapted as Mehrangarh in year 2000. At the as an assistant curator, I asked myself that within the historic fort of Jodhpur, there is this dichotomy of historic fort and a museum, and whether people are visiting a museum or are they visiting the fort. And I was quick to realize that actually people are here to visit the fort. Many of the larger Indian population didn't even fully understand the concept of the museum. In this slide, you see we have a very, very diverse visitor profile, where a very important constituency of ours are the rural Marwar, Rajasthan visitors who see the fort as a symbol of their pride, symbol of their history. They don't view it as a museum. So our responsibility of site administrator becomes even more challenging. How do you interpret the history and the aspects of culture in a way that it is inclusive. It is inclusive of the wider visitor profile of 1 million visitors. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, just before the corona lockdown, we were 1.1 million visitors annually. And this is a very, very diverse visitor profile. And our understanding was, after years of interaction with the stakeholders, that Mehrangarh is uniquely positioned as a historic site which needs to be interpreted in a more inclusive way, rather than it being just limited to a museum or limited to a historic site, as a living and a breathing space. And that's why fort comes alive with numerous events and activities that are integral part of the fort's history. Here in this slide, you see several in period costume being part of a procession. And processions are integral part of the fort's history and culture. So there are several events and activities in the fort, which truly I won't use the word enacted because they are not enacted. They are integral part of the fort's history and its interpretation. I was very clear uh, and in articulating that our attempt is not to Disneyfy Mehrangarh, but to truly bring the essence of the building alive to the visitors. And it has to be done very subtly. There is a thin line between Disneyfication and bringing the site alive. So we have been very aware of that fact throughout the process of identifying stories and stories to tell to our diverse visitor audience. I would quickly run through the slides which show you the kind of collection that the museum has, and it's one of the well-preserved collection of Rajput and Mughal history. In the slide, you see an 18th century palanquin, Mahadol, almost monumental in its form, almost architectural in its form, with its dome, cusped arches, overhanging eaves, gives you that quality of the architectural element that you see in the fort. It represents the military history of Mehrangarh. It was captured as a war booty. And just to give you a sense that how collections are built, they are not collections which are purely connoisseurial in terms of the king acquiring them for his taste. In a place like Mehrangarh, the collection also represents the military and diplomatic history of the fort. Here you have uh, a beautiful Krishna Jhula from the uh, 18th century, visually also represented in the painting. And the collection in that respect is both secular as well as um, based on the connoisseurship of the Maharajas. One of the important collections of the fort is the arms and armor collection. King as a warrior was an important role, and Selekhana or the Shastragar or the armory was a very important space and place where the arms and armor of the kingdom were housed. And they are very, very important uh, pace markers to understand the military history of the Rathors. The Rathors were active from Deccan to Afghanistan to the important campaigns of the Mughals, and many of the arms and armor represents that dynamic military history of the Rathors. Beautiful hookah bowls from Mughal period. On the left, you have a glass enamel hookah from the imperial karkhana or workshop of the Mughal court. On the right, a melon designed hookah base from Bidar, both connected to the military history of the Rathors. Here, and the collection is very important, one of the last surviving uh, Mughal tents from Shah Jahan's period called Lal Dera. Collection is very rich in its collection of tents and its accessories, costumes, and a very unique and rich collection of paintings. Very sort of revolutionary in this time. Miniatures, as we understand, are small format Indian paintings, but in Marwar, there is this period in the 18th and the 19th century when the format really changes. And as my colleague, who I see in the room, Deborah Diamond, who curated the much acclaimed Garden and Cosmos exhibition at the Smithsonian, which then went on to Seattle, to the British Museum, and finally at the um, in Sydney, articulated in the exhibition that how this period was a period of great imaginativeness, of creativity among the Jodhpur artists, where they took to scale and the miniature became monumental. These large format paintings are narrative in style. They are again not fixed in sort of a space, but are very, very dynamic spaces telling the story of different aspect of the narrative. Here, the story of the great Krishna. And here is Maharaja Man Singh. And it's interesting that Maharaja Man Singh, who was not destined to become the king, but he had the great faith in his Nath Guru. And maybe around the same time, Diwali, he received the blessing that that he would be the future king of Jodhpur. Maharaja Man Singh Ji was a very, very dynamic and unique character in Marwar's history, under whose patronage a huge volume of paintings were produced, which were the main body of work for the Garden Cosmos exhibition that Deborah Diamond curated, which was also a follow-up exhibition done by her on the tradition of yoga. The exhibition Yoga, the Art of Transformation, had some important works from Jodhpur at the heart of that exhibition, because Jodhpur is truly a unique place where you find this tradition of Hatha Yoga, not only represented visually but also represented archivally in the central archives of Mehrangarh, revealing some of very important aspects of the yogic tradition of India. I would now sort of switch. I was asked by the organizers to talk a bit about our program of international exhibitions, and I've briefly sort of on Garden Cosmos, which was our first major um, collaborative exhibition with the Smithsonian. And the second recent collaborative exhibition was Peacock in the Desert, the Royal Arts of Jodhpur, which was 300 objects from a single collection in India, one of the largest private collection to be represented internationally in collaboration with Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. And uh, it sort of reveal some of the aspects that I have already spoken in the beginning. These were themes which were less explored, um, but themes which were very important part of understanding the visual history of Rajputs were represented in this exhibition. The exhibition opened with the idea of tradition and continuity. And that's one of the very key element to understand the Indian royalty, that they are not frozen in time. They are still living. They are important bearers of continuity. And this exhibition in the beginning revealed that aspect of continuity, that how the Indian royalty is still towards contrib- contributing towards continuity of tradition. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, a very important role that we should understand and we should acknowledge, that the Indian royalty is playing. India would have been a very different country if they didn't play the role that they played under a very long rule of the Mughals, followed by the British. I personally feel India is what India is to a large extent to the contribution of the Indian royal families, which I believe someday would be fully acknowledged. These are some of the slides from Peacock in the Desert in Seattle. Towards the end, I would very quickly run you through a few slides. In the beginning, I mentioned to you that Mehrangarh is ever evolving, it is ever changing, it is very dynamic, and we constantly engage ourselves, we constantly question ourselves. Um, we were already acknowledged as a well run historic site, and yet we are thinking about reimagining Mehrangarh. This is a new program which was launched last year, and it's a 3-year program which will see that the site of Mehrangarh is interpreted in a different way. Um, as I mentioned to you in the beginning, that I saw a big sign when I joined in 2000, which read Mehrangarh Museum, which made me aware that it has to be a seamless experience. We cannot differentiate between the fort and the museum. The principal site is the Mehrangarh Fort. If you ask anyone where are they going, they would say we are going to see the fort. No one would say that we are going to see the museum. For long, the concentration was redevelopment of a museum, but we have now articulated that it is what requires is reimagining Mehrangarh, and reimagining Mehrangarh involves both physical infrastructure that is needed for 1 million visitors and ever growing. Of course, the pandemic has changed the dynamics, but it's temporary. We will see the numbers go up again, And the other was to interpret the site in a way that is engaging. So I'll quickly run you through the program of reimagining. The reimagining program involves infrastructure changes, which involves a new visitor center. The 1.1 million visitor figure, ever growing at 7 to 9%, required us to think about a new place where the visitors could have their first experience, and after they've had the first experience, move on to enjoy the site in its fullest form. The new visitor center would be able to accommodate about 2 million visitors annually, and it would have a seamless experience of ticketing, security, audio guides, and after this function is over, truly interact with the site uninterrupted. So these are some of the visuals of this brilliant design that our architectural partners are giving us. It's a modular structure, and it's a prefabricated metal structure with um, elements of stone coming in. Very seamless, as you can see. It doesn't compete with the fort. It sits there and functions in a very modest way. The next important element of the reimagining is a new conservation center and archive. Again, we've identified a space in the fort, which is almost like a well. This building is going to come up, and it won't have any skyline. It will just sit in this well, and will house a state-of-the-art conservation center and an archive. Uh, which now brings me to the last part of the presentation, which is re-looking at the galleries. In 70s, when the historic spaces were adapted as museum gallery spaces, this was in 70s, there was a strong focus on object-centric approach. For example, our first gallery is an elephant seat gallery. The second gallery is palanquin gallery. And then it's miniature painting gallery. Then it's a textile gallery. In a place like Fort, unfortunately, this is a very segmented approach. It breaks our understanding of history, it breaks our understanding of the site. It is not an integral approach, it is not an inclusive approach. The fort was alive with the history and a role played by multiple people, from the gatekeeper to the priest, to the craftsmen, to the service individuals. So it was not only the history and story of the king and the queen, it was the story and uh, the engagement of several people who were integral part of the fort. So, what do we do to tell that story? And the new narrative plan acknowledges the role played by several individuals, several group of individuals, and their stories and their contribution would be acknowledged in the new design and interpretive plan. We are at the stage of finalizing our design solution, and this design solution would be inclusive, it would be multidisciplinary, it would be interactive, it would be engaging, it would be redefining the way in which the historic forts, historic monuments, historic museums can tell the story. We are storytellers, and unfortunately, our stories have been linear. We have been just very sort of, blindfoldedly following certain norms of storytelling. Here in this experiment, we are trying that storytelling is much more interesting, much more engaging, and uh, these are some of the visuals that we are discussing with our shortlisted designers, where it is not going to be an object-centric approach, but several objects who are the characters in telling the story coming together to reveal the different aspects of kingship in the fort. Here in the slide, you see, large blow up of miniature paintings for people to understand how to zoom out from miniature to monumental, how to see details, just to give them that insight that miniature is just not about miniature. It is about expanding your eyelids into experiencing the monumental. The site would be inclusive. It would have an important element of inclusiveness, of including physically enabled, and fort, which was meant to be. I think this is. I would end by this site and the following site, just to give you the range of what we are trying to achieve at Mehrangarh. A place like Fort, which was meant to be invincible, it was meant to exclude uh, the unwanted, uh, is attempting to be inclusive. It is attempting to be accessible. The high fortified walls um, wants to open its door to the varied um, experiences, both physical and metaphorical. Thank you. I'm open to questions at this point.
Hi. So thank you for that amazing, insightful lecture. I'm sure that it was wonderful for all of us to know the plants, the history, and how you are envisioning it. We do have over here is the
Satavisha, unfortunately, I'm not able to hear.
So she'll get back. I think she's facing some network issues.
Okay. Is there something that you can relay to us in terms of questions, or if there are questions from the audience?
I think there's one from Amy Poster. It says that if you could describe potential outreach via collaborations and programs online with local, regional, and national audiences, especially effective for institutions and museums worldwide, as we found during the pandemic.
Yes, I think pandemic has posed a unique situation to us. We were closed all this time. We only opened effective October 1st. And um, I agree with Amy that this pandemic has given us an opportunity that of collaboration without the physical elements attached to it. It does gives an opportunity in terms of the technological outreach for museums to interact with its artists, its programs, and the interactive programs of collaborating museums. It's a matter of time. I'm a little mixed in my feelings of how much online collaboration and how much actual um, physical collaboration can be useful. But I'm for sure um, confident that some of the barriers and some of the walls that we had created among ourselves uh, is no longer there. I think we need not be physically there to initiate collaborations. We need not be physically there to develop collaboration. There's a lot that technology enables us, and it's just matter of time and space and physicality of presenting them. But that introduction to the diverse form of collaboration is there, and I think as cultural institution, the pandemic has given us that opportunity to break the physical barrier and collaborate in real time and try and see how much we can benefit from that. And yes, Amy has been a great collaborator when we were working with the exhibition in Houston, and I understand that question very well. And I personally feel that a lot can be initiated through the collaborative process, and then finally resulting into something physical.
Uh, One more question, which is to do with the collection, and that so it's a museum trust that you're talking about. So in that regard, I would like to ask that how's the family's respond to your selection, choice of objects to be displayed, and other kind of design as well as design inputs?
So yeah, that's a good question. I would say because in the setup of family-run organization, the role of the family and the professional curators. Um, uh, I think we've been lucky in Jodhpur that the family gives the freedom to the curatorial professional staff to do their job. They have a very engaging participatory role in suggesting some of the nuances that they feel are important. But I think the curatorial narrative is left to the curators, and I think that's an important sort of distinguishing factor for Mehrangarh, that it has been able to nurture and it has been able to establish a professional management team that takes its decisions based on the professional challenges. The family comes in as the role of the trustees, and sort of relies heavily on the professional team that they have employed. And I think that's the one of the important distinguishing factors that has enabled Mehrangarh Museum Trust to collaborate with international partners because of the freedom that the owners have given.
Mhm. Thank you. Do we have, if there isn't any, no. So one final question. Throughout your presentation, you were constantly sort of back and forth saying the importance of Mehrangarh as a shared museum, shared history, and constantly citing the importance of local. So in that regard, how would you say that the impact of the fort as well as the museum had or has on, let's say, the local population? Is there a way or ways the local people can generate funds, or is there a way that the museum is supporting local artisans? So if you could just elaborate a little bit on the same.
So in Jodhpur, I mean, unfortunately, I mean, we are positioned in this unique position where we are one of the important tourist destination, if you can say that, and that allows for the wider community of people attached to this economy to be attached to us. But having said that, um, when I said it's inclusive in its approach, is to acknowledge the role and important aspect played by different individuals in conveying the story of Mehrangarh, whether it is the local guide, whether it is the owner of a local guest house or a hotel. Um, we are the principal place where his client is going. And if we are inclusive in his approach, uh, and if we are inclusive in the new narrative and the new story that we envision to share with the wider public, then he is involved with us. If he are just going to share the story of the Raja and the Rani, maybe he will not. But if we are telling the story of the priest, of the craftsman, of the gatekeeper, of the musician, and all the hundreds of people who were associated with the story of Mehrangarh, then we believe that each and every one of them would be involved in the new vision that we present for Mehrangarh.
Great, thank you. We have one question from Viva. If she's around, she can ask. Would you like to ask the question yourself? Good. You need to unmute yourself.
Viva, if you can unmute yourself, please.
The participants aren't allowed to speak, so I think Chatvisha, you can continue.
Okay, I'll read it. So she writes that there is an undeniable intersectionality of style and influence across the regions in miniature paintings and the surviving cultural artifacts of the period. How is the newer curatorial practice going to showcase this variety in a non-object oriented display?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we are not. I mean, there is in the new curative plan, there is a section which is actually dedicated to the Karkhana of miniature painting, where you understand the technique and the tradition of miniature painting. But the visual example or a visual reference in the form of miniature painting would be emerging in every gallery. So it is not sort of, just seen narrowly in a miniature painting tradition technique, and nor it was conceived to be in that very narrow format of us understanding that this is miniature painting. It was a tradition of documenting the visual history of that period. And if we can place these footprints of visual history in different aspects of understanding the role of the kingship, then we are truly understanding the miniature painting tradition. Unfortunately, what we are doing is that we are categorizing them into a very narrow categories of, this is a miniature painting gallery. It was not conceived to be a miniature painting tradition. It was conceived originally as documenting a visual aspect of the kingship of certain tradition, and it had a context. Unfortunately, we have lost that context, and we just see a miniature painting in an individual frame. That individual frame had a larger context. So the idea is to bring that larger context in that larger frame for us to understand its understanding in the more inclusive way.
Okay, so I think this kind of brings us to the end of the lecture. There isn't any more question. So yes, thank you, and thank you so much for that amazing, amazing lecture. Thank you, distinguished guests. Thank you, interns, and thank you, colleagues at CHH, also the IT, without which this wouldn't have been possible. And finally, to Professor Schmidt, whose voice we cannot really hear, I mean, because of the sore throat. And I hope that she'll be back next week, and also our lovely guests, without which this wouldn't have been what it is today. So you can follow us on our social media pages. And I also insist that if you haven't already, please do visit the Mehrangarh Fort Museum website as well. It's a treat.
Thank you.
So on that note, have an amazing Diwali and have a great weekend. Thank you and good night, everyone.
Thank you. Very happy Diwali.
Thank you to you.
Thank you very much. Lovely, lovely way to spend and wake up my lovely way to spend my morning with an early wake up.
Very, very nice. Thank you.